The Malaysian English Language Teaching Association, or MELTA as it is commonly known, is Malaysia's oldest national English language teaching association. Founded in 1958, the association has grown significantly over the years. Despite its evolution from the Selangor English Language Teaching Association, as it was first known, the aspirations of the association remain anchored to what is spelled out in our Constitution. We are an association of English language teachers dedicated to advancing English language education. Towards this end, MELTA works with partners in Malaysia as well as overseas. To date, MELTA has formal partnerships with English language teaching associations in Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, Mongolia, Indonesia, India, Brunei, Hong Kong, Bangladesh, and Taiwan. These partnerships allow MELTA to engage in continuous dialogue with other English language teaching associations, and in doing so, create opportunities for the professional development of our members on a global scale. Within Malaysia, MELTA is committed to reaching as many English teachers as possible. Towards this goal, we are represented by MELTA chapters made up of dedicated teams of English language practitioners. As a national association, the association activities are managed by several bureaus, namely bureaus for training, research and development, publications, special projects, journals, special interest groups, chapters, and technologies. The association is only as strong as its members, so we look forward to your support. Join us and let's work towards our shared vision of advancing English language education.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me in this presentation today. I'd like to thank UBSM for their kind invitation to speak at this conference. The focus of my presentation today is on the post-secondary syllabus for English in Malaysia. I've described this as a broken link, and I will go on to discuss this further in my presentation. All too often, we have seen news reports about the poor English language proficiency of our students, of our graduates who enter the workplace. And very often, employers lament about how our graduates do not possess the kind of proficiency which allows them to function effectively at the workplace. And so it falls upon educators to reflect on these criticisms and to think of ways of how they can improve the delivery of English language education in our school system. In the last few years, we have seen the introduction of the KSSR and KSSM curricula in our primary and secondary schools. And these have, of course, taken the place of the KBSM and KBSR curricula, which were in place in our schools for many, many years. What the introduction of a new curriculum allows policymakers as well as classroom practitioners to do is to reflect on the latest demands, which are never the same, as well as how we can better deliver our lessons to meet the current needs of our students. When the KSSR and KSSM was introduced a few years ago, we saw significant changes take place within English language education in both our primary and secondary schools. In fact, the changes that took place with the syllabus from year 1 up to year 6 in primary school, as well as from 1 up to from 5 in our secondary schools, were informed by a policy document called the Roadmap for English Language Education in Malaysia. The roadmap, in fact, goes beyond primary and secondary school education. It, in fact, prescribes what needs to happen from preschool right up to university. And so it is a comprehensive plan of action that needs to be translated into action at all levels. The reform process that we see taking place in English language education is guided significantly by the Common European Framework of Reference, or the CEFR. It is a framework which is not alien in the field of education. In fact, it has been adopted in over 40 countries globally. What the CEFR allows us to do is to talk about English language proficiency and performance in the language in very tangible terms. We talk about what a learner is able to do with English at different points in time as they progress in learning the English language. What I believe that the new curriculum also allows is for accountability. So a teacher, for example, who takes a student through lessons for a whole year and then passes the student on to the next teacher is in some ways held accountable for the kind of learning that has taken place while the student has been under the charge of this particular teacher. So when a teacher delivers a student to the next teacher, the teacher should in fact provide the teacher who receives the students with an update of what each child is able to do in terms of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And so the hope is that we do not end up in a situation where a student passes through 6 years of education, arrives in secondary school, and then have teachers in secondary school saying that this student is unable to read and write in English. So that is the hope and that is the aspiration. Now, as I said, the roadmap for English language education prescribes progress of a student from preschool right up to university. And these are the aspirational targets. We want to keep in mind, though, that these aspirational targets were set several years ago. And since then, the CEFR, being a living document, has evolved. And if you read up on the CEFR, you now know that there is a accompanying compendium to the CEFR, and you see that the levels described in the CEFR, the A1, A2, B1, B2, as well as C1, C2, has now been sliced even finer. And what you have now are new scales such as the A2 plus or the B2 plus, which bridges the progress of a student from one level to the next. Now, how does this inform post-secondary education? We all know that students who want to apply to enter our public universities, or even private universities for that matter, are asked to show evidence of English language proficiency. And the Malaysian University English test becomes that assessment which informs receiving universities of the English language abilities of a student. So a student falls into a bands 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and that gets reported when a student sits for the MUET exam. Just last year, the MUET exam was aligned to the CEFR. And so a student sitting for the MUET exam now receives results which describes what the student is able to do along the lines of the CEFR. What we want to keep in mind is that the MUET is essentially a test. It is a test which measures the proficiency of a candidate in terms of his or her readiness to function in the context of a higher education setting. So does this particular student possess the proficiency required to manage the challenges of pursuing courses in the English language when at university. Now, for years now, students who enter Form 6 or who go into matriculation colleges or pursues a foundation program at university would attend classes which essentially prepares them for the MUET exam. And so what this does is it puts into the minds of the students, and by extension even teachers, the end goal being doing well in the MUET exam. Now, when you teach to the test, you find yourselves faced with several limitations. For one, a course which is prepared or geared towards preparing students for an exam puts pressure on teachers to produce results. And these results are often spelled out in terms of the ability of a teacher to produce a certain number of students who achieve bands 5 or even band 6, band 4, band 3, band 2, band 1. So the aspiration is that students achieve bands 4 and above so that they are accepted into courses at university. So what does the teacher do? The teacher is then informed by the format of the exam. Lessons are designed around the MUET exam. So a listening class or a speaking class or a reading class is shaped by the format of the assessment which students sit for. So a speaking class is often a session where students are drilled and given practice on the way the English language speaking assessment is done in the MUET. Now this, I would contend, is at the cost of a broader curriculum which celebrates inquiry and engagement in the language classroom, which celebrates creativity and risk-taking in learning a language, because the focus becomes the MUET exam and how the students need to perform in the MUET. So the question now is, does preparing students for the MUET translate into preparing students for the challenges at university? Those of us who teach in higher learning institutions often lament about the poor proficiency of our students. And one of the complaints has been that although students possess the desired band 4 or band 5 in the MUET, that doesn't appear to translate into the ability to perform well when at university. Now, what are the demands of students when they enter university? They need to be able to listen to lectures. They need to be able to read academic texts and translate that reading into producing research papers, for example, academic papers, assignments. They need to be able to stand in front of a class and deliver a presentation with confidence. They need to successfully complete the assignments, read text sources which are in English, and sometimes even needing to translate what they read in English into assignments which are in the Malay language, let's say. These are the kinds of skills which students need to possess when they enter university. Now, teachers who teach students the MUET may argue that by preparing students for the MUET, they are indeed preparing students to listen to lectures, because the listening activities of the MUET are designed with lectures in mind. They may argue that students are reading academic texts in Form 6 as they prepare for the MUET. But does reading texts and preparing for the MUET necessarily translate into reflecting the kind of demands that are on the students when they enter university? Now, this is something that I think we want to reflect on as we think about a post-secondary syllabus which takes teachers away from the focus on the MOET. What a post-secondary syllabus can do, as what it does in primary and secondary schools, is that it locates proficiency of the 4 skills within a broader context. And in the case of post-secondary education, this is a context of academic communication in higher education. Teachers who teach post-secondary students would ideally receive students who are at B1 upon completing the SPM English. The challenge of the teachers in Form 6 is now to take them to the next level, which is a B2 mid maybe, or a B1 plus, so that they are ready to move on to the demands of university. So what teachers in Form 6 or in matriculation colleges, what these teachers can do is to essentially bridge the gap and equip students with the kinds of skills and knowledge that they require when they enter university. And this can be through a variety of texts, of a variety of activities. As a case in point, for example, submitting an assignment when at university. This is an entire process where a student listens to a lecture with friends, then goes back and has a discussion with friends where mediation takes place. What was delivered in that lecture? What were the main points? What was something that I missed that you maybe captured? These are discussions that should be taking place among students. And then ultimately, based on that discussion, you have students preparing notes. So it's an entire process which sometimes escapes teachers if they're focusing on preparing students for the listening tasks of the MOET. So what a syllabus can do is actually connect the dots, right? Connect the dots between listening to a discussion, a mediation that takes place, to the writing process of preparing notes. In addition, if I can give another example, is reading academic texts. Sure, students who prepare for the MOET are also reading academic texts. But what is that purpose of reading the academic texts? Students are reading texts so that they are able to digest information and then present that information in the forms of written assignments. So when students write assignments, they're not just referring to a single text, but they are drawing on multiple academic texts. They are bringing ideas together, right? Identifying salient points, citing those different sources, and pulling that together into a whole. These are skills and knowledge which students require beyond what is demanded in the MOET, right? So a student has to be trained to read different articles and bring these ideas together. You may argue that students are already doing this in other subjects that they do in Form 6, but often in the case of students in Form 6, the other subjects are taught and delivered in Bahasa Malaysia. Now, what students who enter university have to do is now read sources, articles, which are more often than not in the English language, and then present that in assignments which are either in Malay or in English. In the university where I teach, we receive students mainly from Malaysian public schools who have undergone the entire education in the Malay language, but then find themselves in a situation where lectures are delivered in English and they are required to submit assignments in the English language. And so some of these students find this a monumental task. And so the argument is that Form 6 or post-secondary education needs to bridge this gap between what has taken place in primary and secondary schools and what is expected of students when they enter university. Simply preparing students for the MOAT exam is not enough, because what is expected of students in university is far more than what is reflected in the MOAT exam. And so there is a need for a post-secondary syllabus, so that the syllabus can guide teachers in post-secondary schools to design a whole number of activities which are reflective of the demands of these students when they enter university. They get to focus on building a vocabulary range which is needed at the B1, B2 range. They get to hone their skills in reading and listening and translating that into products such as lecture notes and written assignments where they draw on multiple sources of information. And so the whole idea of a need for a post-secondary syllabus is this, that as of now, at least in a lot of schools or colleges where students are pursuing a post-secondary education, the focus on the MOAT is not giving enough attention to what is demanded of students when they enter university. And there is a need for a post-secondary syllabus to fill this gap. And that's the whole premise behind my presentation today. And I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.